Hello there, and welcome to the Sex Good Actually podcast. This is our inaugural episode, starring yours truly, hosted by yours truly, Chris Williams, filmmaker, sex watcher extraordinaire? No, that would be deranged. Welcome to the first episode of our show about sex in cinema in its many forms. And today is going to be a sort of introductory episode, sort of about the concept of the pod and what you can expect in future episodes. I'm so happy you're here. Let's get this shit going. Yeah, so this is a podcast. You ever heard one of those? I guess, I think I just woke up a morning last week and I said, I am a white man and this motherfucker doesn't have a podcast. And I said, I think that's a problem. All joking aside, though, welcome to the first episode of the show. A unique sort of an idea for a show, I think. It's, I think there are a lot of movie podcasts. I think anyone who would be listening to this could attest to that. And there's a lot I love, there's a lot I listen to. But I think there is an angle that has not been talked about. Now, specifically, I think the creation of this show and this idea comes from the sort of odd reality and discourse we're having right now about sex in film and TV. Now, this podcast is going to be, I think, unless I do like 6 years of episodes and run out, it's going to be mostly, I think, almost exclusively, I'm going to call it exclusively a podcast about film. Now, that's not to say that there isn't lots of stuff to talk about when it comes to TV. There is. Look at that creep, Sam Levinson making Euphoria. There's so much to talk about there. Really, the point of this show is to talk about how sex is, I think, important to be in movies. I think there is this odd, prude thing going around right now about how we can't have nudity in movies, we can't have intimacy in movies. But I think we see, people's heads explode in movies, and we don't really bat an eye, and for some reason, intimacy is something that we're nauseated by. I think it's an interesting topic to bring up. Now, Hollywood obviously has a very grim history when it comes to depicting sex. Obviously, the behind-the-scenes realities of making sex scenes, about intimacy, about abuse on these sets, about movies about sex. So I think there is just so much to talk about there, are the sex comedies of the 80s, right? Now, these movies are, wow, all the nerds are going to get the girls, and there's so much, sexual assault in these movies that are helmed as comedies, these assaults that are not observed as assaults in the context of these movies. And I think that's a really, vital thing to talk about, especially, when, young men see these movies at such a young age, and it can really affect them in a lot of ways and how they perceive sex and intimacy. But also, there's nothing better than a good sex scene. I think there is, definitely oh no, it's like pornography. It's no, there is an intimacy and a beauty and a really good-ass sex scene in a movie that we really don't get a lot anymore that I think is great and as thrilling as a great action set piece, depending on whoever is behind the camera and the two or three or however many performers are in front of it. This is going to be a podcast about so many different movies, so many different conversations about the movies, whether the sex is good or bad. I know the podcast is called Sex Good, actually, and that's more so my, business statement, because in movies, sex is good. We should be having more sex in movies, but we shouldn't be exploiting people during these sex scenes. I want to talk about intimacy, coordination, and everything else in between to really get down to the bottom of it. Now, something I've been creating over the last couple weeks, I essentially just did it 3 a.m. 3 a.m. on a night. I was like, all right, so I need to get a list put together so I can show to other people, to the oncoming guests, of what movies we're going to be doing. And so I said, okay, so I'm going to sit here, I'm going to pull up a Word document, type up top sex good, actually, period, movies for the podcast. Okay, we got it. We have the title, obviously. We're off to a good start. And then I just Googled erotic thrillers, sex movies. Now, this is not a podcast that covers pornography. I'm sure there are podcasts that do that. No, this is essentially a podcast that is going to cover movies about sex in one way or another. Now, it can not necessarily be all about sex, but have a really famous sex scene, like a movie like Top Gun, right? And that goofy-ass sex scene that's been parodied in, like, Hot Shots. And then also, like, the sort of the homosexuality that is so exudes and sweats through those hot dudes' bods in Top Gun. There's so much to talk about in so many different ways. Of course, I think the first episode of the show is going to be an episode on 50 Shades of Grey. I know you're listening to an episode now, and I'm so blessed you're here talking about, just perving out with me for a little bit. But 50 Shades of Grey will be our number one episode, because I think there is so much interesting conversations to be had about that movie. That movie's talk about consent, that movie's sort of depiction of, BDSM, that culture. Now, that is just a starting point. But there is so many movies, from Showgirls to Wild Things to Gaspar Noé movies to Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac, Volumes 1 and 2, Shame, Brokeback Mountain, Blue is the Warmest Color, talking about the sort of abuse those two actresses experience on that. There is an entire spectrum about sex movies. I really was overwhelmed because I was like, okay, I'm going to make this, Word document. I'm like, I'm sure there's a lot. There's like hundreds. I have hundreds on this list. This podcast will go on forever is what I'm telling you. So if you're hopping on now with the Chris train, and I appreciate that you are, and God willing you are, because if you're not on the Chris train, then I think you've got the wrong ride and you're going to have to get off at the wrong station and buy another ticket. But this Chris ride is going to take us through a lot of different movies. Now, there's sex comedies, like we talked about, but there's like sex comedies of the 90s, American Pie, sex comedies of the early 2000s, 40-Year-Old Virgin, there's the erotic thrillers of the 90s, there's the erotic thriller of the last 20 years, The Voyeur, Sydney Sweeney, Justice, the guy from Detective Pikachu, I don't remember his name. There is going to be lots to talk about. Of course, we got Midsommar. I remember... I'm just sort of looking over this list very briefly and talking about a few moments I think I've had of joy. I remember in Midsommar, spoilers for Midsommar, not too much, but there's a very bizarre sex scene between the boyfriend in the movie and a big group of women. I just remember seeing it in theaters, and everyone was just completely baffled, laughing. It was a joyous occasion. It was something that I don't think people were prepared for. Now, I wonder if that was sort of in execution of the movie. To me, I think there was a little bit of an odd execution. Now, I don't want to relitigate Midsommar. This is not the Midsommar episode. This is the episode introducing the show. But I do wonder if that sort of awkward sensation we all feel when these intimate things are happening is just a sort of weird inability to confront intimacy in film. I think that's something that film confronted a lot more in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, and I think there's just been sort of an odd movement, in America at least, to have a lot more, I think, sort of quiet movies about sex. Now, TV is a completely different story. You look at Showtime, HBO, The Girlfriend Experience. Ever heard of it? Have you ever heard of The Girlfriend Experience? You should take a ride on The Girlfriend Experience. I don't know why everything is a train thing today, but I guess that's where I'm going. We are on a train to Sexland, I guess, is where we're ultimately headed. But there's so many different movies that fit into this odd hole. Now, that's not trying to be sexual, but you know what? Holes are a big part of sex, guys. I don't know if you heard about that. Anyway, it's going to be an interesting ride. I'm really excited to be beginning this journey and discussing this very strange topic. A topic that I don't think is talked about enough. A topic that I definitely think there is more nuance than sex is bad. Because I think sex is good, actually. I think there's going to be a lot to say when it comes to a lot of these movies. Some movies, maybe not. The sort of game plan is, every week, having a new co-host of sorts. I have this giant tome of a list of weird erotic movies. They're going to pick one, and then every following episode, we're going to really deep dive into those movies. Whether they're good or not, we're going to talk about. But then we're going to talk about the sort of logistics of the sex stuff in them. Whether it be, the one sex scene in Top Gun, or whether it be the handling of sex in Boogie Nights. There's going to be a lot to talk about. And it's not going to be just straight sex. We want to see the gays having sex. We want to see the non-binary folks having sex. It is a sex party for all genders and walks of life. It's going to be a really interesting journey. I think it's, there's going to be really grim episodes. We're going to talk about Sallow. We're going to talk about, because there's a lot of sicko freak movies out there. But I think that's why it makes this show an interesting one. There's going to be, so many bizarre episodes on movies you might not have heard of. But I hope that they will spring to you the ability to explore these stranger movies and explore these stranger ideas for why you'd want to experience these movies. It's going to be a weird journey, but I think it's going to be one that's really worth taking. There's so many movies to explore these weird topics, these weird experiences that we all have. Because, we don't all have the same experience. Like, I've not shot anybody in the head. God forbid. But sex, well, I don't want to confess, but hey, sex, I've done it. You can trust me. Boobs, I've seen them. Cocks and balls, I have them. So there's going to be... I promise the takes will be more nuanced than that. There's not going to be like wow, the boobs in the movie, what are we talking about? No, this is going to be a real show where we talk about who's got the best cock in a movie. You know what I mean? We're really seasoned veterans, real heroes of the podcast space, really trying to do things that are different than most people, really trying to get down to the brass tacks. But movies are fun, and with this, I really just want to make something that feels new. I want to make a movie podcast, but not just make a movie podcast where every episode we're like, hey, did you see Cocaine Bear? The answer is no. I have not, and I won't see Cocaine Bear. I want to actually have conversations about things that I think can affect people's lives, give different perceptions on sex and intimacy in your own life, and talk about Don John. Because I don't know if you heard about it, but Don John, he has a few priorities in life. He has his sex. Well, pardon me. He has his girls. He has his boys. He has his car, I believe, is one of them. He likes to clean. I know that's a plot point. Honestly, I should save this for the Don John episode. Now, if you don't know what Don John is, this is a movie where Joseph Gordon-Levitt's writing directorial debut, where he is a guy from New Jersey, and he loves porn and to jerk off to it. It's very funny. Honestly, it's really not, but conceptually it is funny. I don't know why that was his big move. There's so much to talk about about Don John. If you do want to be held over and you really want to get down to Don John's brass tacks, because that might be episode 300, we cover Don John. That's kind of a late entry in the podcast. It's not a high priority, but there's not a lot of movies about jerking off. Though I did write Yes, God, Yes right next to Don John on my Word document spread. Yes, God, Yes. What's the fuck? The sister from Stranger Things, where she's like in Catholic school and is like, I love jerking off to Titanic. Don't we all? Remember when Kate Winslet put her hand on the glass? Wild. These are the sorts of things and conversations that I think you can really look forward to when we really get into this pod, when we really get into brass tacks talking about these different movies, these different scenes. Now, not every episode will be a laugh riot. Some of these movies, like, I can't wait to deep dive Irreversible or, Boys Don't Cry. But I think they're important conversations to have. And I really just don't want it to be as simple as, sex is not cool. Like, we could have sex. We shouldn't have any sex. It's always unnecessary is always the conversation or the point I hear brought up. Oh, it's always unnecessary. It's like, what? Is it emotionally resonant? Is it interesting visually? Like, what? It's a movie. Nothing's necessary. Come on now. We don't need to boil movies and plot points and things like this down to brass tacks. I think it's so much more interesting when we can explore these things in wild ways, not necessarily necessary ways, or at least how normal people would perceive necessary. I mean, sex is a big part of life. It's how you and I got here. I don't know if you heard about that. Well, for the most part. I mean, it could have been, unless there was inseminated through eggs. I don't know your life. But it's a big part of life, and I don't want to dodge that. And cinema? Goddamn, they got me covered. Real quick, I do want to talk about the movie that sort of got me into wanting to make this podcast. Now, let me... I need to pull up the IMDb page because I've already fucking forgot what it was. No, I haven't. This is a movie called Daybreak. Now, Daybreak is a 1993 HBO original movie. Now, why did I watch this movie originally? Well, was it because I was horny? No. But, maybe. It was because I have a longtime crush on the actress Moira Kelly, an actress who doesn't have a very long and varied career. She was in the first season of West Wing and Never Seen Again. She's in the, I think, underseen and undervalued movie called With Honors, the Brendan Fraser vehicle where he and his college classmates help out Joe Pesci, a homeless man. Weird movie. She's the love interest and one of their roommates. She's in Cutting Edge, the 80s ice skating comedy. As I said, not the most flourishing career, but I think it was With Honors or West Wing. I'm like, wow, this lady's cute. And from a young age, that has been an unfortunate thing. Like, oh, if there's cute people in it, I'm going to check that shit out. It's a crush problem, and I think we all have it. Now, this movie also stars Cuba Gooding Jr., the film Daybreak. Now, Daybreak, a great actor. Cuba Gooding Jr. is definitely an actor I enjoy, an actor I like. Fortunately, he has been accused of sexual misconduct by 30 different people. So that's a big yikes, a big swing and a miss from Cuba. So we're not going to talk to his character, and I also didn't really know about that until after I watched Daybreak. But Daybreak is this bizarre movie about this fascist government locking up people with a disease. Apparently it's based on a play. I didn't really know anything about this movie other than I thought Moira Kelly was cute. But it led to me watching this strange movie about how people with AIDS were alienated in the peak of, the Reagan administration. It was a really interesting movie, though I think it was kind of a misfire when it comes to being a movie about AIDS, because it was literally a hetero couple as the leads. There is two gay men in the movie. They don't really do much. They're there, but they don't really aren't very active participants in the narrative other than being a part of Cuba Gooding Jr.'s resistance fighter army. This was a really interesting movie. It showed the neglect that these people had. It showed this sexual passion that these people still had despite this horrific, brutal, horrible disease. It was a disease that the government just ignored because it was killing a complete sect of people they hated. Conservatives don't like gay people. That's an unfortunate reality we're still faced with today. And I just found this movie so oddly profound, so strangely interesting. There's a scene near the end where, spoilers for the 1993 film Daybreak, Cuba Gooding Jr. has been locked in this disgusting, abandoned penitentiary. It's where, before, he had been rescuing people in an attempt to give them a more peaceful death, not one governed by this disgusting fascist regime. Now, what it eventually ends up is Cuba, during a fight or some other reason, he gets this disease. Now, the movie never explicitly says it's AIDS or something similar to it, but, I mean, it's about AIDS. And there's just this scene where Moira Kelly, who's so desperately in love with Cuba Gooding Jr., goes into this disgusting, rotting prison where these people being the fascists, have completely forgotten about these whole human beings because they don't care about them. They want them to quietly be out of our business and die. That was the Reagan administration's perception of gay men, especially gay men, dying of AIDS. Of anyone dying of AIDS. Moira Kelly ends up going to this really disgusting hospital, and they have this scene where she's just so desperate and so broken. She's just like, I don't know, we've only had sex with condoms. There's a weird plot point earlier on about how, they've banned condoms, though just recently there was a whole conservative talking point about how sex without the intent to have children is wrong. So all these things might seem cartoony, and I'm sure they might have even seemed sort of outlandish in the 90s, but they seem oddly prescient now. The scene sort of ends where Moira Kelly is just begging Cuba to, have sex with her. It's this oddly sort of sensual, heartbreaking scene. it ends, and she leaves because she has to, continue the fight against this fascist regime. Cuba's like, hey, I'll just die and stuff. It's very sad. It's a good scene, but there is a profound feeling I felt. I didn't feel inspired, but I felt overwhelmed by the sensation to have conversations about it. It's a movie that I don't think anyone has seen. I'm talking about the film Daybreak from 1993, and you're probably like, what the fuck is Daybreak from the year 1993? I've already told you. Based on a play by Alan Bone, Beirut. Never heard of that either. Again, all it started was me having a crush on Moira Kelly, but inevitably it led to the creation of this podcast. Now, this has just sort of been a taste of the sort of, I think, passionate discussion you can have about this topic. But Daybreak is what brought me here. I've always been sort of fascinated with, from a young age I was scared of sex, I think as a lot of young people are. But as I've grown older, I think sex in movies is such an interesting thing that people avoid discussing so often. And I don't get the point. I just really wanted to bring up Daybreak because if I didn't, who else would? It's not 1993 anymore. It's actually, it's the 20th anniversary of the film Daybreak. Somehow I've watched 3 Cuba Gooding Jr. movies in a row. That's a conversation for a different day. I didn't pay for them. So it was weird. I don't know why that happened, how that lined up. Daybreak's a weird movie, but it had this bizarre sexual energy, aside from the whole, allegory about AIDS, that really was just like, this inspires a conversation that I think could be really, I don't know, maybe not helpful, but really interesting. And that's what Sex Good actually is about. It's about these sort of weird outlying movies about intimacy, romance, sex in its many forms, because it's something we should talk about. It's something that I think is really interesting and something that I'm so happy to be talking about now. So, a big shout out to Daybreak from 1993 for encouraging me to make this podcast. And thank you guys so much for listening to this initial, very brief episode. I can assure you the next episodes will be much longer, much more broad. There will be conversation episodes. But an episode where I'm just here by myself, I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I wanted to be here, leave you to it, leave you wanting more. Next week will be the 50 Shades of Grey episode with my mom. Yes, I think the real first episode will be really fun. I'm going to do an episode with my mom, with more episodes to come very, very soon after. Now, for some reason, if another episode is the first episode, that episode with my mom will be arriving very shortly. But again, thank you so much for listening to this first episode. You can follow me on Twitter at CodeRedEnjoyer. You can follow me on Twitch at Chris the Oddity, YouTube at Film Starter Productions, and at Chris the Oddity, 2 different channels that do 2 different things. And also, you can listen to this and rate us on iTunes. If you like this initial episode, please spread the word. If you like this concept and perhaps might want to be on an episode, you could message us at the Sex Good Actually podcast YouTube or at the email at sexgoodactually@gmail.com. Hey, I'm looking for guests. I'm looking for explorations of this topic. I don't know everybody on the planet. I would love all the help I can get. I just want to thank you for being here, and thank you so much for listening. I think this was a good episode. I think this is a good start to something really new and really interesting. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have an incredible week. And I hope, you're ready for what comes next. Because, I don't know if you heard about this, but sex good, actually?